Welcome into episode 185 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. And we are just over 24 hours away from game one between the Boston Bruins and the Florida Panthers. TD Garden, obviously, it's going to be on Marathon Monday. A lot to look forward to in the city. I'm going to throw it over to Scott and Bridget quickly just to go over what the latest lines were Sunday and who was at practice, who wasn't, before we kind of break everything down for Monday night.
Yeah, well, the biggest news is that Patrice Bergeron missed practice for the second straight day. Was not there Saturday, was not there again Sunday. We found out, obviously Bruins aren't giving out too much info, but we did find out on Sunday that he's dealing with an illness in addition to whatever this lingering upper body injury is that, was the official reason why he left Thursday's game. A few guys have been battling illness. Jeremy Swayman was also not at Sunday's practice due to illness. Tomas Nosek missed a game last week due to illness. Don Sweeney said, he doesn't really think there's a bug going through the room, but certainly a few guys seem to have caught something. I was sick last week. I don't think they're related, but who knows?
I was very, very close when I talked to Jeremy Swayman in Montreal, so I'm slightly concerned.
Yeah. I hadn't even been around the Bruins in a week. Like when I was there Saturday, I realized that my last recording from talking to them was a full week earlier. But yeah, so they're dealing with that. So in practice, the lines were for the second straight day, Pavel Zacha between Marchand and DeBrusk in Bergeron's spot. David Krejci between Tyler Bertuzzi and David Pastrnak. Third line of Taylor Hall, Charlie Coyle, and Trent Frederick. And fourth line of Nick Foligno, Tomas Nosek, and Garnet Hathaway. On defense, it was the same both days as well. Orlov McAvoy, Lindholm Carlo, and Forbort Clifton with Grzelcyk and Zboril as the extras. So it certainly seems like if Bergeron is out game one, that would be the lineup. Now the question though is he going to play? In the updates after practice were if he feels better, he's in. He doesn't need the two practices over the weekend. If he's feeling up to it, he's going to play. And we know that come playoff time, Bergeron will push through pretty much anything. So I would assume that unless he's like really sick or his injury is really serious, I still feel like he's going to be in game one. But obviously you would have liked to have seen him on the ice this weekend, just for some assurance. But they're obviously making plans for both, right? If he's ready, then he goes right back in, and if he's not, then they've practiced with other lines for a couple days now.
Yeah. So it's definitely concerning when someone goes out of the lineup the last game of the regular season, doesn't come back, and then doesn't practice ahead of the first playoff game. But I know Marchand also spoke after practice and mentioned that Bergeron was sick. And then Montgomery said it was a mixture of a nagging injury, which is what he left the game. Oh, Sweeney. Yeah. So he said, nagging injury, upper body injury that he left the Montreal game with, but also that illness was just as important as why he wasn't at practice again. So, and then Marchand said that his only issue is that he's old. So I think that was your question, Scott. He said, I'm just sore and, my only issue is that I'm old. So he's ready to go. But one of the things we talked about in terms of the lines that, the way things shake out, but assuming Bergeron plays, all right, we can go through what it looks like if he doesn't, but I think more likely than not he's playing, so we may as well go through what it looks like with him still on the first line. First line stays intact, but then the question becomes, what does Montgomery want to do with Bertuzzi? Because he still hasn't practiced him with Hall and Coyle as a line, and that continued again on Saturday and Sunday. Both had opportunities to do that.
They did actually they practiced together once, like a week ago, when Hall first got on the ice out of a no contact jersey.
Now, do you know
that was it?
did they not like what that looked like in practice? Like, do you remember going back? I mean, it's been a while.
No, actually, just the opposite. Montgomery said he really liked how it looked. So, I don't. Yeah, it is odd. Like they've had chances to use it in a game or in other practices since then, and they just haven't. So, yeah, a little surprising. But
My question is, if you're insistent on, first of all, it was hard practices because you're trying to get ready for the playoffs. You're insistent on keeping together that Hall, Coyle, Frederick line. It like, is that really the line you want to have as your third line in the playoffs? Like at that point in time, where does Bertuzzi even go?
So, I mean, I think if we don't know what the lines are, I don't think the Florida Panthers know what the lines are. And I think that's part of what's going on here, too. I think that there might be a little bit of rest going on for Bergeron and Marchand, who got pulled out of practice a little bit early. I also think there's a little bit of gamesmanship going on. I think that the Bruins are trying to wait till the last hour for Florida to figure out what they're, not that you never want to make your lines based off of another team because that's just kind of, playing afraid. But as far as like how Paul Maurice wants to, and again, he's the away team the first 2 games, so he's not going to be matching lines. It'll be Montgomery. But I think there might be a little bit of mystery here for the Florida Panthers going into game 1. I was obviously hoping we talked later this week, late last week about when we were going to record this episode, and we decided on Sunday because we figured, well, Sunday would be the last, real kind of full practice before game 1. We could see what the lines were and would give us the most information. But of course, here we are, and we've been given nothing because Bergeron hasn't been in there. So, if Bergeron's not playing tomorrow night, yes, the lines that you guys read off, that would be what they're going to go with in my mind. Bridget, to your question, based off of Sunday, I think they're going to keep the first line as is. I think they're going to do Krejci between Bertuzzi and Pasternak. I just don't see why they would have that line together for practice right now if they were just going to do Bertuzzi, Hall, and Coyle at the last hour. Like, I don't know. So I think that Bertuzzi, Krejci, and Pasternak is going to be in line. And then it would be Hall, Coyle, and Zacha. And then Foligno, Nosek, Hathaway. I think Frederick will be the odd guy out. That's based off of what I'm seeing on the ice without Bergeron.
Yeah, Razor mentioned that as well on Sunday Skate this morning. And I think it's a good point, like especially at home, because my point is like I would have some questions about the defense of a Bertuzzi, Krejci, Pasternak line. Zacha does do a lot of defensive work when he's on that check line, but at home you can get favorable matchups for them, and then you can use Hall, Coyle, Zacha as a checking line and get them out there for matchups against either the Barkov line or the Tkachuk line, whichever one you want them out there against. So that's definitely in play as well. And I think definitely a possibility, especially since we haven't seen Hall, Coyle, Bertuzzi.
And Scott, that Bertuzzi, Krejci, Pasternak line, when you watched the scrimmage the other day, did you notice anything defensively with them? Like, because you're right, Zacha is probably the best defender on that check line. Krejci's a little bit slow getting back. Pasta is Pasta. He's more of an offensive player. And Bertuzzi's probably a little bit more offensive as well. But did you, in the short time on Saturday and Sunday that you were there, notice anything about how they played in the D zone?
No, I mean, nothing different than what we've seen in actually, I was going to say in games, but I guess technically we haven't seen that in games because it's been Zacha between them. But I think the line operates similarly where like Krejci's going to have to be back and doing, a lot of defensive work. And I still think he can. Like yes, he's not the fastest skater and, but he's so responsible. He's so smart that he rarely gets himself caught in situations where he's way up ice. So like they'll have to guard against that. The Panthers are a really good transition team. So you have to be aware, you have to make sure you're like if a defenseman's pitching, someone has to be cycling back. You can't get 4 guys, onto puck. Like that's not going to fly against Florida. And that's going to go for any line. So I think Krejci can still be the responsible one on that line. But Bertuzzi and Pastrnak will have to be aware. Like, they can't both be up ice at all times. Both of them really, when it's their turn to be cycling back and when it's their turn to get back on defense, like, they're going to have to, even if they're getting favorable matchups. Yeah, you hope that they just spend a lot of time in the offensive zone and don't have to defend. But inevitably, in a playoff series, like, you're going to have time in your own zone. So, yeah, it would be interesting to watch for sure. Because I do think Zacha to, not that Bertuzzi's like terrible defensively or anything, but I do think Zacha is, a little better, a little more well-rounded in that respect.
Yeah, I also am intrigued by Zacha playing with Coyle and Frederic, though. Like, Zacha is such a good player, such a versatile player that we've oftentimes, or most of the season, he's been playing in the top six, but imagine him in your bottom six. And once again, you put him, because he can play center, you have both him and Coyle out there at the same time, two guys that can both play that role if needed. And I think that might actually be a pretty interesting look, but that's another thing that we really have not seen at all. So, and once again, we mentioned it's not something that's been practiced this weekend because Zacha's up with DeBrusk and Marchand. I don't know, Brian, what you think of what Zacha could be like around Charlie Coyle. I mean, that's still a good puck possession line.
Well, did you mean to say
Hall,
Coyle,
Zacha and Hall? Yeah.
Yeah, I think putting Zacha on that third line speaks to just how well he's played all year in all situations. And I think that for the Bruins, if I'm the coaching staff, I'm wondering, like, does Bertuzzi need to be around more elite finishers in order for his playmaking to kind of come to the forefront? And you can say that about anybody, obviously, but I think that Zacha adds he's very, very quietly just good at everything. And I think for Tyler Bertuzzi to feel good about his game, I feel like the points might need to be there for him. And I think if you're looking at a line with him, Bertuzzi, Hall, and Coyle, like, yeah, Taylor Hall's great when he's on his game. Coyle's had a great year. I'm reluctant to call Taylor Hall like an elite finisher. I don't think that's what he is at this point in his career. Certainly not the caliber of David Pastrnak. So I just think the Bruins are looking at, okay, can Bertuzzi's skillful yet grinder mentality, can that translate better for points for him, make him feel good, more productive? Then does Zacha need that to feel good about his game? Not necessarily. I think Zacha, he can gel with Taylor Hall, he can gel with Charlie Coyle. They've all played together at different points this year in different situations. Whereas Bertuzzi and Coyle, they barely play together. Bertuzzi and Hall have not played together at all. So I just think that the Bruins are like, well, Bertuzzi's played with Pastrnak a lot. They've done really well together. And David Krejci can fit like a glove with anybody. Yes, the check line's been great, but I think right now they're trying to figure out, just like how everybody would feel best about their game right now. So that's how I feel about it. I think it's actually pretty smart, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, and the one time that Hall, Coyle, and Bertuzzi did practice together, one of the things Montgomery noted was someone, they're all going to have a little more of a shot first mentality. Well, Zaz had this year. Like, we've seen him use a shot. So that also went to that line of a good shot that Coyle and Hall set up and used their playmaking skills to get the puck to.
Yeah, no, and it's kind of funny because at the trade deadline, I don't think any of us were saying, oh, the Bruins need to add someone to play with Pastrnak and Krejci. Like, that seemed like that had been an area they had figured out. And then all of a sudden we're here heading into the playoffs, and we're all just as surprised as anyone else that line might not be together, at least in game one. Obviously they can switch back to it at any time. And that's the luxury of having so much depth, is they could really move these guys anywhere. You have, most everyone in your top nine, you got to feel flexible with that you can kind of put next to anyone. So, adding Bertuzzi has created this luxury where you don't necessarily know exactly where he's going to fit, but you can try him, to keep him with Pastrnak. Obviously anyone's going to look better playing next to Pastrnak because you slide the puck over to him and he finishes. So, he's Bertuzzi's set up for success on that second line with Krejci and Pastrnak, that's for sure. And then you think about, the fact that they added Hathaway. Now that means you're going to have to figure out who comes out of the lineup on the fourth line when Foligno comes back. And it seems like Foligno might be back for the first game. I think he thinks he's ready to go for the first game. And, at some point in the series, he will come back, and then you have to make the decision about that fourth line.
And I think he's practicing as if he's back, right, Scott? He's on that fourth line, slotted in. So, it's like you don't want to read too much into practice lines throughout the regular season. It's just used whatever. They do things for different reasons. But you would have to kind of read into these lines. I just don't think they'd have Foligno on that fourth line if they were going to stick AJ Greer in for game one or Lauko or Frederick or whomever. So, I think, like I said, I think if Bergeron goes, I think the tough conversation is had with Trent Frederick, where it's like, look, like you've done awesome this year. You're going to get in throughout these playoffs, but right now we're going with I don't want to say a big boy lineup that's kind of condescending to him. He's one of their bigger players, but just as far as like been there, done that, like veterans, leaders, guys that are hungry, that understand the moment fully, and like Nick Foligno is gonna. I think he's in for game one. I'm actually surprised. There's a couple of other, like Foligno being on that fourth line, and then Derek Forbort being on that third D pair in practice with Grzelcyk on the quote unquote fourth D pair. It was a little surprising, but I also kind of admire like Montgomery just being like, yeah, you guys are good to go. Get back where you were. You know what I mean? It's not often. Sometimes you see guys lose a spot temporarily until like they work their way back into the lineup a little bit, just through conditioning or whatever, or confidence. But Montgomery's with Nick Foligno and Derek Forbort, he just seems to have just stuck them right back where they were before they got injured.
Well, I think that's his ultimate test, to see if they're ready. But I think Grzelcyk's also possibly dealing with some sort of an illness, because he came out of Saturday's practice early. Which he hasn't been someone that's been on our injury radar. So maybe that's something that's going on with him as well. But, maybe that's why he gets a little bit less time. And I know that they just want Forbort to knock the rust off. So they want him to be out there, to see how he looks, where he would slot in. And one point about Frederick, and we can talk about all that, Scott, that I thought was interesting the other day was somebody asked Coach, who do you think would maybe be like your unsung hero, your X factor that people don't know, like guys that step up in the playoffs that you're not necessarily expecting. And one of the guys he named was Trent Frederick. I think he sees Frederick in this lineup. So, and I don't think just like here and there, I think that he wants Frederick in his lineup on a nightly basis based on some of the things he said about him.
Yeah, but I mean, someone has to come out though. And I agree with Brian that like Frederick seems like kind of the natural guy to be the odd man out when Foligno goes in. On defense, so like that up front, I think I'm okay with Foligno going back in as long as he is 100%. Like I get the edge, the attitude that he brings, leadership on the bench, all that. Like I see the value. On defense, I personally would be holding Forbort out until someone gives me a reason to sit them. And I don't think any of the top six have. Like I said this on Sunday Skate, but to me, my top six right now, I would line it up as Grzelcyk, McAvoy, Lindholm, Carlo, Orlov, Clifton. I think that is without question your best 5-on-5 lineup. You have one of your big three in McAvoy, Lindholm, and Orlov on the ice every single second of the game. Your penalty kill has stayed really good, even with Forbort out of the lineup. To me, putting him back in, and if it is Grzelcyk ends up sitting, as Bridget alluded to, Montgomery did say Grzelcyk was dealing with a little something, so maybe that explains why he's on the fourth pairing. But realistically, it certainly seems like a sign that he's going to be the healthy scratch. And I just don't really love doing that. Like I think Grzelcyk's been playing really well. I think he's had a very good season. I get why there are concerns about him come playoff time. We know he has struggled to hold up in the playoffs in the past, but I think he's been playing a smarter game this year. I think he's done a better job of avoiding hits, of moving the puck quickly, not getting himself into bad situations. And I would give him the chance to show that he can do that in the playoffs this year before taking him out. Like, just preemptively sitting him to get Forbort back in. I just don't love it. Like, to me, there is absolutely no question that Forbort is a weaker player than Grzelcyk 5-on-5. So the big advantage he's always had is his penalty killing. And I think their penalty killing has stayed really good even with him out. And the Panthers power play is good, but like not elite. Like, it's not the Oilers. Like, it's not one of the absolute best power plays in the league. I think they're right around the Bruins, like 10th or 11th. So I would stick with the 6 that they've been using down the stretch that have got him here, that have been so good together, rather than, getting Forbort back in, where I just don't really think anyone deserves to come out.
I just think simply he's not ready, right? And there's a good enough reason to keep him out. Like, he's rusty. Montgomery said he's rusty. I mean, from what I saw, I know it's an optional morning skate in Montreal that he took, but I did think he looked a little bit off. And there's, your built-in excuse, your built-in reason why you're starting the 6 that you're starting is because Forbort's just not ready yet. I don't think he is ready to come back. He hadn't even been skating for a long time. So we were wondering if he was going to make it back at one point in the first round at all. And now it kind of feels like they might be rushing him into the lineup. But I have a feeling he's not playing game 1 just because I don't think he's ready. And I think maybe the practice time was just to try to get him up to speed. And I think the best bet is to keep Grzelcyk in there for now. I don't think he's 100% knocked off the rest yet.
So, I mean, there's a few things at play here, though. I mean, first of all, as it pertains to the Bruins and Derek Forbort and how much he skated or hasn't skated, I honestly don't know how much of that may have been just like gamesmanship by the Bruins down the stretch. I don't know. I don't think there's any rules against the guy on LTIR practicing. Maybe there are. I don't know how that works. But again, like certain guys, I definitely think that certain guys were on, injured reserve at different times for obvious reasons for the Bruins down the stretch here. And if there was other implications that you have to abide by with that, then I don't know if that's the case or not. But real quick on Forbort, like the only thing I'll say is maybe he's not ready, but maybe he is ready. And if he is ready, it's one of those situations where all guys are going to have to play at some point or another. And do you really want him going, another 3 weeks without playing? Like, it's almost like just kind of get his sea legs back under him at some point. The last thing I'll say is there are a lot of teams in the Eastern Conference. I think that Matt Grzelcyk over Derek Forbort would benefit the Bruins, certainly from a skating perspective. Rangers, Toronto, New Jersey. Trying to think of maybe I'll stop there for now. But like the Panthers, to me, much similar to the Islanders. I just feel like that's a series where, like, I understand Scott says that Forbort's by far the worst 5-on-5 defenseman. I get that. I'm not going to dispute that analytically. But I do think there is something to be said about playing a Florida team that I think has a little bit more edge to them than, say, some other teams in the Eastern Conference. And there are things that Derek Forbort does better than Matt Grzelcyk that might not show up in the stat sheet, like boxing guys out in front, taking a hit in the corner, giving a hit in the corner. And I'm not this is not me saying play the big, bad physical defenseman, because I don't think Derek Forbort is that. What I'm telling you is that there's some guys on Florida who are going to try to get on the forecheck, like Ryan Lomberg and Tkachuk and Giovanni Smith and Nick Cousins, and it's a little bit tougher to knock Derek Forbort off of his caveman simple hockey game than it is to do it to Matt Grzelcyk. And so I'm just saying I wouldn't be so critical of Derek Forbort and what he brings to the game because he's not as smooth of a skater or as good of a passer as Matt Grzelcyk. I think there's different intangibles as to what might go into him playing a game against Florida as opposed to Matt right now. And I think that there's plenty of teams and situations where Grzelcyk would be much better than Forbort, but this might not be one of them right now. And if Matt plays tomorrow night, then I'm sure he'll do great. I'm just saying I'm trying to get into the mind of coaches. It's not always, who's a better player necessarily overall. It's like what's this game gonna look like? Who are we lining up against? So I would just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting though, because the problem with facing a team like Florida is that offensively, I mentioned this on Sunday Skate, like they can beat you both ways. They grade out as one of the best attacking teams. They also grade out as one of the best teams off the rush. So Forbort can probably handle the forecheck better than Grzelcyk. Grzelcyk can defend the rush a lot better. Like he's fleeter of foot. I think he has better gaps, better stick. Like I think Forbort would be more likely to potentially get exposed by Florida's speed coming down the wing. So there's that give and take of both sides of it, where it's, which one do you want to prioritize? Are you trying to take away the rush, or do you want someone who's holding up against the forecheck? And maybe, if it is Forbort over Grzelcyk, maybe the gamble is that, playoff hockey tends to be a little more forechecking than rush style anyways. So maybe you're preemptively kind of preparing for that game. But I would be a little bit worried though about, especially Forbort, if he does have some rust, he's been on the lineup for a while, how's his foot speed? How is he holding up when, an Anthony Duclair comes flying down the wing at him? So I think that's also something that has to be considered, is like whatever Forbort win in terms of in the corners in front of the net, I think you can point Grzelcyk having an advantage in terms of foot speed and denying entry.
Yeah, and I think also it would change the way that if you wanted to have the three guys, like you were saying earlier, Scott, if you wanted to have one of Lindholm, McAvoy, or Orlov all on the ice at the same time, if your pair is Forbort, Clifton, you're not doing that. You're not having, there's not one of those guys on each pair. So that's another different look. I mean, once again, we're talking about the luxury of being able to look at all of those things. If I was to just come out and guess right now, and I would say Forbort's out, Foligno's in, and for game one, and then we'll see where it goes from there. And I'm not saying because Forbort should be out necessarily matchup wise. I think most of where I come from with that is that he's not 100% back. And if you're questioning whether or not he's going to be able to help the team and not hurt them in any way because he's not fully ready, then, you keep him out because you have those guys that are fully ready and that can go for game one. So I think that would be my guess as of right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to go based off of the D pairs in Sunday's practice, and then if they change, if they have a morning skate tomorrow and it's flipped around, then I'll go with that. I'm just putting stock into what Montgomery went with today, especially on the back end, because there was no injuries to speak of. I know Grzelcyk was feeling sick or whatever, but yeah, either way, I would say the last thing I'll say is this conversation, it's an amazing conversation to have because and you mentioned it, Bridget, a minute ago, like the depth that this team has and the options that they have it's amazing. To say it's a great problem to have is an understatement. The flexibility, the depth of this team on the back end, depending on who you're playing, where you're playing them, it's really, really impressive what this roster looks like right now going into the playoffs.
And the other injury that we've been checking in on this weekend was Ullmark, right? So if we want to talk about that a little bit, Ullmark practiced both Saturday and Sunday. He says he feels good. Montgomery says he feels good, but then the gamesmanship comes back in and they will not list a game one starter yet. So as of Sunday, they said goalie Bob's making a decision on Monday. They would not say.
Yeah, I mean, Swayman missing Sunday's practice, I think, pretty much settles that. I'd be very surprised if they come back with him as a starter coming off an illness that caused him to miss practice. So it's Ullmark. They can play around and say they're not naming their starter yet, but he's been on the ice both practices. Swayman hasn't. So, Ullmark did say he feels good. He said The only concern he does have for Monday is getting to the Garden on Marathon Monday, which
I have the same concern.
Yeah, same Linus. Like I gotta, head in for morning skate and then the game. I'm like, that's gonna be fun getting around Boston, but we'll figure it out. Yeah, to me, as far as goaltending, like I'm gonna assume Ullmark really is good to go until or unless we see otherwise. Like I know the last thing we saw from him in a game wasn't great. He slides across the crease, a little slow to get up, clearly dealing with something, plays a few more minutes, but then leaves that game, doesn't travel to Montreal. I know it's playoffs and no one gives you much information on injuries, but everyone's saying he's fine. It was muscle tightness. It was just precautionary, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to assume he's good to go until, either they start Swayman or until we see Ullmark like slow moving around or slow to get up or whatever. I think he's okay. The more interesting goalie discussion in this series is what Florida does, and they have also not revealed their game one starter. It seems like most people are assuming it's Alex Lyon, who really emerged as their starter down the stretch ahead of Sergei Bobrovsky, who had a really tough stretch, then was dealing with an illness of his own, missed, a couple games because of that, but then did not get a starting job back even once he was back. They rode with Lyon, and he had a really hot 7-game stretch before finally he allowed 4 goals to Carolina in the season finale, but it seems like they're going hot hands. So even though Alex Lyon is a 30-year-old career AHLer and Sergei Bobrovsky makes $10 million a year, it seems like the betting favorite to start game one for Florida is Alex Lyon ahead of Bobrovsky, which is super fascinating because you're talking about someone with no NHL playoff experience. Bobrovsky, lots of playoff experience, some of it very mixed, but at least a guy who's been there. So that is really interesting to watch and really interesting to see, if Lyon struggles, how quickly would they go to Bobrovsky and all that. We've seen this a few times in recent years where the Bruins are facing a team that has some serious goalie questions going into the series.
Yeah, the Bruins have their own goalie questions, but they're more like, hey, we have 2 great goalies. What should we do? Whereas on this side, we have this guy who's played 15 games this year, but he's playing way better than Bobrovsky. What should we do? He's got a winning record. He's been playing really well. He's probably one of the main reasons why they made the playoffs. And Montgomery said that he was one of the better players he had seen at a lower level. He's been playing really great. I don't know how you take him out.
See, I mean, I don't want to rehash like a previous skate pod debate, but like I don't think the Bruins are in a situation of like we have 2 great goalies. What do we do? I think we have 2 great goalies. We know exactly what we should do. Like Ullmark, he was the quickest goalie in league history to get to 49 wins in 40 games. He leads all statistical categories for goaltenders. And like I know he and Swayman split time, but it wasn't a 50-50 split. It was like, what was it, like 60-40, like just around there. It's not like it was a straight split. The good news though is that if Ullmark falters or he gets hurt, like yes, you have Swayman there who is like right there. But I think like Ullmark's the guy. And as you guys talked about a minute ago, like he seems like he's good to go. Is it concerning that he's been rested down the stretch and he tweaked something? I mean, sure, but you know what though? Like I don't think he's the only one that's going to be playing through something at some point. So I don't think they're questioning what they're doing. It's just a matter of can he continue to play at the level that we've gotten accustomed to this year and stay healthy.
Yeah, I think, some Bruins fans, I think, are understandably still haunted a little bit by Tuukka Rask 2 years ago, where it's, okay, everyone knows he's dealing with something. He's clearly not 100%, but they keep sticking with him because he's your guy. Like, I get why there would be that trepidation of, hey, hopefully that doesn't happen with Ullmark. Like, if he really is banged up and he's slowing down and he's only 75%, like, I hope they go to Swayman. Like, I get that part of it. I don't think this is the same situation exactly. Like, as we know now, Tuukka was playing with a torn hip labrum, which is, a pretty serious injury, especially for a goalie. again, until or unless we hear something that indicates Ullmark is dealing with something more serious than, muscle tightness, precautionary, whatever, I think he's going to be okay.
Yeah, and I mentioned that this morning on Morning Skate, and Razor was like, "No, don't even worry about it because you got Swayman to go right in, right there." And I think that the difference between this dynamic than the Tuukka Swayman dynamic was they were not willing to pull the plug on Tuukka quick enough, whereas they have no reason not to make that switch quicker with this current goalie tandem that they have. Now, I'm imagining, and this is just because of where we work, some like skies falling takes coming this week at some point, if or even maybe tomorrow, like, oh, Swayman's sick and Ullmark might be hurt. Like, what's gonna happen? This is the worst case scenario. That's just because the business we work in. But I think that at this point, all of that is just there's no credibility to the fact that neither of those guys will be ready to go game one. They probably both be close to 100%, if not 100%, for Monday. So we'll get another look at them. I know people have made a lot of the fact that they don't have a lot of playoff experience in the past. Neither does Alex Lyon. I don't know if he has any playoff experience. I have to go back. He's only played 39 career NHL games. So no, he's not. He's never played a playoff game. So you're going up against a guy theoretically, if it's Lyon instead of Bobrovsky, who is in a position of having even less playoff experience than you.
So I did want to ask you guys quickly, just getting off the goalies for a second here. As it pertains to Bergeron and what he's dealing with, how when the Bruins go on long playoff runs, so 2011, 2013, 2019, and you're watching the Bruins in the Cup Finals in like June, and you think to yourself, oh my God, round one seems like it was so long ago. It feels like it was like a year ago, right? Basically, I'm just trying to illustrate how long the postseason is if the Bruins want to get to where they want to get to. And are you concerned at all, not for game one, not game 2, 3, 4 of round one necessarily, but are you concerned about Bergeron already being banged up before this juggernaut of an Eastern Conference to get to the Cup Finals and then eventually hopefully win the Cup Finals? Like 2 months from now that's a long, grueling 2 months. And I guess the same question goes for Krejci and maybe even Martian a little bit, but Krejci and Bergeron down the stretch they've been dealing with something, and it's not, unfortunately, it's not necessarily just going to go away just because the playoffs are starting. In fact, it'll probably linger and perhaps get worse.
Yeah, I think it's fair. They are older. They do take a little longer to recover from bumps and bruises and soreness. So, right now everyone's presenting the united front of like, we're just being super, super cautious. And, any little bump, bruise, illness, like we're just going to let guys rest. And that's fine as long as that is the truth. But yeah, if it is, something that's a little more serious and is going to linger and could affect his play, then like, yeah, obviously that's concerning. I think, I don't know, Montgomery said it's something that Bergeron has dealt with before and knows how to deal with. So I don't know exactly what that is, but yeah, I mean, I guess anytime you have guys a little bit in and out of the lineup and needing rest, especially when it is older guy like Bergeron, missing these last practices, Krejci missing games, Martian leaving a practice early, like, yeah, it's sort of like double-edged sword because it's like those are guys who you want to get the extra rest, and so if you can build it in over the weekend, then fine. But at the same time, they're also the guys who are going to need to get into the heart of a series. There's not a lot of extra rest to be built in. This series against Florida, there's one point where there's 2 days between games instead of just one. So the games happen fast, and there's not a lot of recovery time in between. So I'm fine with giving it to them now, but yeah, if they're going to be in a spot where they need extra rest going forward, like there's not going to be a lot of opportunities for it unless you wrap series up early and get it between series. But you see, like they got to be able to play every other night. So you better hope that they're okay, because you're gonna need them.
Yeah,
maybe survive a game here and there without one of them, but you need them overall.
Yeah, the buzzword of the week is precautionary. I feel like I've heard it way too many times, and I don't know if I 100% believe it. Sometimes when I hear it anymore, because that's just been the line. But for Bergeron, I don't see him not playing every single game of this playoffs unless he literally is missing an arm. He might need rest. He might not be 100%. He's playing either way. He did play all but 4 games in the regular season. He played a 78 game season. Obviously, getting a little rest at this point in the year is fine, but there's no way you're pulling him out of a playoff game. I'm trying to imagine how that conversation would go. And I don't think, I don't think that would even be something that Montgomery would try to bring up, because they know he's not going to take himself out of the lineup if he feels he can still help the team. So, he's just that kind of player. He played with, punctured lung, broken ribs in previous playoffs, and he'll play through whatever quote nagging injury he has. And he's just, I think that maybe with him, I do believe the precautionary thing a little bit more, because if he's dealing with an illness, then that's just the little extra bit of, okay, well, I guess there's 2 things he's dealing with. Let's just get him a little bit of extra time off. I mean, will he kind of wear down by the end of the playoffs, if that's what you're asking, Brian? Maybe he'll be a little bit tired. Maybe he'll probably be really sore. But he played 78 games this year. And I think I can't remember very many times where he's looked super banged up and tired. So, I'm not sure really. He's older now, so we'll see, but he's going to be in there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm less concerned about whether he'll be in the lineup or not. I know he'll be in the lineup if he can be. It's more about can they rely on him to be what he needs to be for them to win a cup, which is a top line center who's still productive on, obviously not just defensively, but offensively too. Now you can play the semantics game of who their top line really is. I know that. I get that. I'm just saying, it's admirable for him to be out there. It is, regardless of what the situation is. But
he's important in that way, not even just on the ice. He's important just the fact that he's there. And I feel like they take energy from when he's playing through all of their injuries, because then they just play even harder. Sorry, Brian, I didn't mean to cut you off, but one of the things that Bergeron, we've been questioning whether or not he'd been as effective as he had in the past was on the power play. So I don't know if you guys want to talk a little bit about power play strategy at this point for the playoffs, because Scott, you tweeted out some of the power play combos.
Bridget, just 1 second, because to finish that thought. So, because in where I was going with that is that in 2019, right, he lost to Ryan O'Reilly in Game 7 on home ice. He was outperformed by his competitor. I don't think that necessarily happens in round 1 of 2019, and I don't want to I'm not pinning that loss on him. I'm just saying the Bruins need him to be the guy that he's going to be consistently. And when you're older, the wear and tear can be effective. So my only concern about these nagging injuries is that it's going to prevent him from being not just a guy out there, but an impact difference maker, potential game breaker that he can be if he's feeling the best that he can feel. And that goes for David Krejci too, and it goes for Brad Marchand as well. So this is not a Patrice Bergeron thing. I'm just saying, and the Bruins have far more depth than they had in 2019 to overcome anything like that. They're better all around. That was my only point about just potentially being concerned later on, not about him playing, but about him continuing to be the game breaker that he can be when he's at the top of his game. And Scott, I don't know if you had any follow up on that, but we can certainly shift to the power play as well, Bridget.
No, I'm good. I'm good with the shift to power play. So, yeah. So in Sunday's practice, they actually changed things up a couple times. So they started with, what essentially looks like the top unit that we're used to, with Lindholm, Pasternak, Marchand, DeBrusque, and then it was Krejci in the bumper spot instead of Bergeron. And then the second unit was McAvoy, Orlov, Foligno, Bertuzzi, and Zacha. Interestingly, Taylor Hall not on that unit. And then they changed things up, and we saw a reunion of, what I called the check unit that we talked about, probably, I don't know, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, of the check line, McAvoy and Bertuzzi. And that was a unit that did really well together. And I kind of wonder again if this is like planning for both things, right? Like, so if Bergeron plays, then the top unit's the top unit. They'd gotten a little bit back on track over the final week and a half of the season before. The power play was terrible in Montreal in the final game, but had been good for like 6 games before that. So if Bergeron's in, you assume that's your top unit is, him, Marchand, Pastrnak, Lindholm, DeBrusk. But then the fact that they kind of jumbled it all up on Sunday, like midway through, I was like, that seems like a contingency plan of, okay, if Bergeron's out, is Montgomery going to go back to that check unit as his top unit? So again, it just comes back to like, it's not ideal to have to be planning for both scenarios one day before game one, but at least all the units they rolled out are pretty much units we've seen for the most part. Nick Foligno playing the bumper was definitely new. That was a little odd, but yeah, so it seems like they're kind of planning for both, and what the top unit's going to be might very well depend on whether Bergeron's playing.
Yeah, and that other unit that you're talking about with Foligno in the bumper with Marchand, DeBrusk, they went with 2 defensemen on that. They went Orlov, Lindholm, and once again leave out Taylor Hall from that scenario.
Yeah, and by the way, like the power play, I think is going to be crucial in this series because I mentioned this on Sunday Skate, but the Panthers take a lot of penalties. They're number 2 in the NHL in penalty minutes, and they're not a very good penalty kill. They rank in the 20s on the PK. So they're going to give you chances, and they're not great at killing them off. So if you're the Bruins, like, this is where you can bury them and make it a quick series. If you make them pay when they go to the box, I think you're already better than them 5-5. You should have the better goaltending. You're definitely better defensively. Your penalty kill is number 1 in the NHL. Their power play is good, not elite. Like if your power play is on, that's where you really bury them and it turns into 4 or 5 games. If your power play is off and it's killing momentum, like it was for about 2 months in, January, February into March, then that's how you give the Panthers some momentum. Games stay close. You let them hang around. So, whatever the power play is going to look like, I definitely think it's a crucial part of this series.
I would say the good news for the Bruins is that if one's faltering, toss the other unit over the boards because they're just as capable of scoring for you. And yeah, I mean, I think obviously you guys mentioned it, but if Bergeron's in the lineup, I think, it's him, Marchand, Pastrnak, DeBrusk, and Lindholm, and then Krejci would just fill in to that slot with where Foligno was today with Bertuzzi, Zacha, Orlov, and McAvoy. That would probably be the most likely scenario, and I think that's actually pretty good because I think McAvoy, his mobility, I think, and creativity, I think might bowl well better with that Bertuzzi, Zacha, Krejci, and Orlov unit, where Lindholm, I think, can help that other unit because they need to get pucks in that outside of Pastrnak. And I think that Lindholm hopefully should be able to help do that maybe a little bit better than the McAvoy does. I think he walks the line a little bit more. I don't want to say more efficiently, but just a little bit more creatively maybe. He's sneakier at getting pucks in the net. I think that might benefit that Bergeron unit if Bergeron's playing. But I feel like there's a few things we should talk about with Florida. We haven't really talked about them too much. So I'll just throw this question to you guys briefly while you're thinking of where you want to go with them specifically. But outside of obviously Alex Barkov, and Matthew Tkachuk, maybe who are some maybe under the radar players for Florida that maybe many Bruins fans just don't know of because they're not watching a ton of Panthers games, but that you'll probably notice them early on in the series and be like, oh yeah, that guy's pretty good. I think for me, I would say it's Brandon Montour in the back end, but you guys may echo that or maybe have somebody else in mind.
I'm always going to go Brandon Montour because he's a UMass guy. So we got to give Brandon Montour props. But another guy that comes to mind maybe, and especially when you talk about the power play, Sam Reinhart has quietly had, a 30-plus goal season. He's, I think, second on the team in power play goals. Let me pull it up here. No, he's first on the team power play goals. He's got 16 power play goals this season. So Sam Reinhart is a special teams guy that, you might want to keep an eye on, especially on that power play. So, I mean, the only person on the Bruins that has more power play goals than that is Pasta, who has 18. So I think Reinhart is kind of a guy that gets overlooked maybe when you talk about matchups, but he's a good player as well. And then Montour is a young guy. That's probably why people maybe haven't heard much of him. And he's also been stuck in the past on some pretty bad teams. He was stuck in Anaheim. He was stuck in Buffalo, I believe. And now he's been able to kind of reach his offensive potential, and he's a really good offensive defenseman back there, fast, young. Well, I say young because he went to school when I was in school. So, but yeah, this is a guy that's going to fly around and try to jump in the offense.
Yeah, I will say on Montour, though, like he can be exposed defensively. He's not a great defender on, I made the comparison this morning, like reminds me a little bit of Tony DeAngelo last year where, yeah, he can absolutely help drive their offense and you have to be aware of him and he's going to help set up goals for them. But if you can get him in his own zone and force him to defend, like you can expose him. So that's definitely, the key with Montour, like limit his offense by burying him in his own zone.
When I heard you compare him to Tony DeAngelo, I know exactly what you mean, but I thought that was so insulting just because of how much I hate Tony DeAngelo. It's like if I was Brendan Montour and someone said, he reminds me of Tony DeAngelo, I'd be like, what the hell? No, like, how dare you?
Yeah.
But I know you mean stylistically.
As far as I know, Brendan Montour not racist. So don't be throwing the racist chance down on him.
He's a good old UMass guy. Of course not.
Yeah, a couple other guys that we haven't mentioned yet. Carter Verhaeghe, guy had 40 goals this year. Like he's a really good goal scorer. He's always around the net. He buries a lot of whether he's on a line with Barkov or Tkachuk or both. Sometimes they load it all up and put them all together. Especially if they're trailing, like you'll see them load that up. He's the one burying a lot of the chances those guys create. And another one, Eetu Luostarinen. Hard name to say, but he has really kind of emerged and become a really nice middle six winger and who can even play some center. I don't think he does anything like super flashy, but he's just effective and he's put up some points. So, he'll play somewhere second or third line or maybe even top line at times, depending on how they shuffle things up. Panthers are a little bit like the Bruins. They use a lot of different line combination sheet. Like most of their top 9 can kind of play anywhere. So, but he's a little bit of their Swiss Army knife. I'll compare him a little bit to Zacha in that sense. I think Zacha's better. I would rather have Zacha, but he's scored some key goals for them this year, and I think is just a really good all around player.
Couple of other good 7-game series type of guys in Florida's lineup, and maybe they're ailing and they're not good to go for game 1. I think they are, but maybe not. Would be Patrick Hornquist, who obviously had a couple cups with Pittsburgh. Definitely gets under the skin of opponents. I don't know if he's healthy. I know he's battled some injuries this year. And then the other guy would be Sam Bennett.
I think he's done. Yeah, I think Hornquist is done for the year. I don't think they're expecting him to play.
Then scratch that. He'll be on the 9th floor with Scott and Bridget eating popcorn. What about Sam Bennett? Is he healthy for them?
I didn't see what his status was Sunday. I mean, I know he's been skating on his own, but as of Saturday, hadn't practiced yet. So it seems kind of up in the air whether he'll be ready game 1 or really any point this series. But yeah, he's big for them though, because with him, I like their center depth where you line up Barkov, Bennett, Anton Lundell, another good player we haven't really mentioned yet. And then Eric Stahl is their 4th line center, which I think is where he belongs. But if Bennett's out, then Lundell has to be a second line center, which I think is a little higher than where he should be. And Stahl moves up to third line center, which I just don't think he's really equipped to handle. I just think he's lost too much to really be effective in that role at his age in this point in his career. So their center depth takes quite a bit of a hit if Bennett's out.
Yeah, and he hasn't played in a little bit under a month. So he hasn't played since March 20th. So game one's April 17th. So it's just about a month of him not being on the ice as well. So that's something to take into consideration.
Yeah, so I mean, if Hornquist was playing and if Sam Bennett was playing, I mean, that would have helped Florida. But that leads me to my next point as to why I think the Bruins are going to win this series and why they're going to be such a difficult team for anybody to beat 4 times in 7 games this year, is because I just think that no matter who you are, if you're playing the Boston Bruins this year, their depth will eventually overwhelm you, and they'll find a way to break through because they just don't stop with the options and the scoring options and the checking options that hop over the boards for them. Like if you're the Panthers, even if you're 6, which is a massive task in and of itself, but let's say you come to Boston for games 1 and 2 and you shut down the Bergeron line and the Krejci line for 2 games. Okay, but you still have to face like Zaka and Hall on the third line and Coyle, and you got to face a fourth line that's capable of scoring. And that's not even to mention the defenseman that can chip in, or the Bruins having a strong outing from their goalie. I just think that the Bruins' depth hopping over the boards is just it's going to be really difficult for anybody to match up with, even the contenders to match up with, let alone Florida, who on paper they're pretty good. They came on strong late, but let's face it. I mean, they finished with 92 points. The Bruins had 135. The Bruins should win this series, and they should win it pretty handedly. I'm not to say that the game is played by robots, because it's not. But this is the problem with the Bruins this year, is like when you go into this postseason, you don't want to say it's cup or bust, because it kind of sounds inhumane. It's like, win the cup or you suck. But for this team this season, what they've built, what the roster that they have, and how they were able to build it, and how they can't keep that forever. This is what happens when you have the greatest season in the history of the league, regular season. You create those expectations. So it starts tomorrow, and I think the Bruins' depth will be the biggest reason that they're able to accomplish their hopeful goal this year.
Yeah, and there's really just one thing I want to circle back to about the matchup, which is something that we've talked about a few times heading into it when we were arguing, would it be a better matchup? Panthers, Islanders, Penguins. Obviously the Penguins, Scott was right. They had one more bad loss in them and they didn't make the playoffs. I mean, really, they didn't look like a playoff team at the end there. But Florida made their case to be a playoff team. They're in the playoffs now, and they have some guys that can bang you up, and a guy that we haven't talked about too much yet, because we were talking about, some guys that maybe people don't know as much about, but Tkachuk is going to probably be front and center this whole series. And I was looking up some of his penalty stats, and you know what? Brendan Montour also is up there with over 100 penalty minutes this year. They both are in the top 10 in penalty minutes. So is AJ Greer. But
because Brendan Montour can't play defense. So
yeah, Brendan Montour. See, those are the kind of penalties that they take because they're hooking a guy at the last second because they're behind the play. Like those are the kind of penalties you don't want to take. Tkachuk's are more that kind of thing, but also the being extra physical the way that he plays. So I don't know if you guys just want to touch a little bit more on Tkachuk and how much of a factor he could be, and also how how would you match up against him? What are you looking for in terms of coverage for him? Because he's a really good net front guy. He's big, he's physical. He's one of those guys in the playoffs that you want to have on your team. That's he's kind of built for the playoffs.
You know what's interesting about Tkachuk is like his hits were down quite a bit this year. Like he's generally around 100 or over 100 hits, and this year I think he finished with 69. Nice,
Scott.
But Yeah, but obviously, like, he still has that in him. Like, he's still a very physical player. He's like a true power forward. Um, I want Lindholm or Orlov out against him as much as possible. And the fact that you have two guys that you're comfortable or that you want out there against him is like an incredible luxury to have. Um, he plays on the right side. He plays his offside, so he's going to be going against your left defenseman a lot. So the fact that you can throw a Lindholm and an Orlov at him is great. And I like those guys' chances against pretty much anyone, at least to slow him down. Look, Kachuk's going to get some points. There's no question. You're not totally blanking him, but I do think the Bruins are as well equipped to defend him as anyone because they have two very good left shot defensemen who can skate, who are smart, who are very good defensively, who are strong, and and can be physical when called upon too.
Yeah, I think those are great points, Scott. I agree. I think Boston's well equipped to handle him. For me, it's more about after the whistles, between the whistles with him, and just if he can pull the Bruins off their game a little bit and agitate them and get under their skin. I think he's winning, right? He's obviously he's a point producer. You've made comments about him not being a massive point producer in the playoffs in the past. But for him, he's one of those players where it's just he does so much outside of the score sheet too, and to impact a game or a series. And whether he's scoring or not, he's going to be playing physical, and it's going to be up to the Bruins to kind of knock him down a peg. Maybe he goes out and takes a run at Pasternak, and then Nick Foligno challenges him to a fight, and in a perfect world, Matthew Tkachuk obliges, and they settle a score, and he says, "You can't do that anymore." But in reality, Matthew Tkachuk will probably skate away and go Foligno into a instigator penalty, and then Florida goes up on the power play, and they score, and it's 1-0. And then when he's back at the confines of Sunrise, Florida, in his own building, maybe then he'll try to get the Bruins to drop the gloves when it doesn't make sense for them. So that's the kind of agitator that Matthew Tkachuk is outside of the point scoring. So he's going to be somebody you have to keep an eye on, and just play him tough, but he's a great player. I mean, people say about Brad Marchand, hate to play against him. We'll love to have him on your team. I mean, he's right up there with that award, that fan award. In my opinion, I think he's awesome. In fact, I very much look forward to watching him and his brother Brady be a former line of Bash Brothers, quite literally, for the next international tournament that takes place for the U.S. So I'm a huge fan of Matthew Tkachuk and what he does. I'm just not going to look forward to watching him do it to some of the local boys the next couple of weeks.
All right, Scott, was that the last thoughts from you guys on the matchup? Anything else?
Yeah, I think I ran out of ideas at an hour. So
well, I would just say
that's why Sunday skate's only 1 hour.
I would say we be remiss if we didn't give a couple of predictions though. I mean, that's kind of a
true. That's what we're finished then.
I mean, I
already know what Scott's going to say.
Right off the bat, I went with Bruins sweep. I got to say, if Bergeron misses a game or two, I don't feel as great about that. But I already made the prediction. It's in writing. It's on the last podcast. It's on Sunday skate, so I got to stick with it. Bruins in 4. And
he was emphatic about it this morning, so he can't really change off of it in how long's it been? 5 hours? Yeah. Take a turn here, but I could see
Panthers in 7.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I could see Florida winning 1. So why don't we say Bruins in 5?
All right. Well, I'll just keep climbing the ladder step by step. I'm taking Boston in 6. I do think Florida's gonna. I don't know if they're gonna give Boston a scare, but I do think they're gonna make them start questioning things at one point in the series about what if the Bruins really want this season to end in April or not. So I think I do think the Bruins will win this series. I think they'll win it in 6 games. 6 games or fewer. I don't see it going 7, but I do think Florida is I do think they bring challenges that might be being underplayed by people looking at this series, that because on paper it should be a Bruins sweep, as Scott said. I just think that the game's played by humans, and we'll see what happens. But I think Boston in 6 or fewer. So with that, yeah, as you guys mentioned, we are over an hour.
Well, do you want to just quickly mention the schedule?
Sure. Yes. Do you either of you have it in front of you?
Yes, I got it. So obviously, game 1 Monday. The first 3 games are all 7:30 p.m. starts. So Monday in Boston at 7:30, Wednesday in Boston at 7:30. Then series switches over to Florida Friday at 7:30, and then Sunday the 3:30 game. I think that the Sunday game is the only one that's not on Ness in this series. And then there's those, to be determined games, which will be next Wednesday and Friday. And
I think they're all on Ness, and even the Sunday afternoon one.
Oh, are they? Okay.
ABC didn't take any of them, so
that means you can watch everything locally here. I know ESPN also is going to be at, because Sean McDonough is going to be doing the games Monday and Wednesday as well. So I assume that you'll be able to watch that feed if that's what you want to watch in Boston as well. So lots of options. But yeah, so that's what the schedule looks like for the next few days. And I'm already worried about how I'm going to get there during the marathon, but and there's also a Red Sox game, and yeah.
Busy day, fun day though.
Yes, hopefully so.
Yeah, so I'll be watching on Nesson, but it'll be muted. So that's why I want to watch the game until further notice. No reason, just gonna mute it. So you guys mentioned tomorrow is obviously Marathon Monday. So for those listening who are potentially running in it, or have friends or family running in it, or you're volunteering, or there's somebody that you're supporting that's there and you're cheering them on, way to go, and enjoy the day. If you're in Boston or wherever you are, enjoy game 1 of the first round of the playoffs. And Bridget, Scott, if you have nothing else, I think that probably wraps it up. So thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you very soon.